so we'll move right along. Up next, we have Rachel.
Hi. Just going to share my screen. I hope this all works well. Okay. And then, all right. So just to check, y'all can see my presentation, but not my speaker notes.
Yes, you are good.
Okay.
Success.
Great. Alrighty. So I'm here to talk to you today about Jews and art and how we can better include this in the classroom. So first, I want to start off by saying, like, I personally think that this topic is like so incredibly important because it's always been viewed as unimportant. And I think that in and of itself, like, kind of makes something important. So yeah, so first I'll start off by talking about like kind of how I started being interested in this. I'm Jewish, by the way, for context, if that wasn't obvious. So I think we all might have seen this textbook, Gardner's Art Through the Ages. Yeah, it's pretty typical of an art history classroom. So in high school, I had an art history class and I had this amazing art teacher. He was my favorite, literally the best. But you know, we all make mistakes. And this mistake he made happened to really affect me. So one day I was getting pretty sick of like all of the like super Jesus art that we were learning about in this textbook, basically. And so I decided to ask him, I was like, hey, like, are we gonna study any like art that isn't about like, are we gonna study any Jewish art, any other stuff? And he said, no, because there is no Jewish art to study. And so like, ever since he said that, I was like, there's something cataclysmically wrong with this. Like, that can't be true, that can't be right. So that really affected me for a while. And I actually did a research project on this a year ago through photography, which I'll show you later. And then it became a much deeper investigation this semester. So at the beginning of all this, we were asked, like, what do you want to know? And whenever I'm asked that question, ever since this happened, my initial immediate thought is, I want to know about Jewish art. I need to know more about it. It needs to happen. So I found myself like scrambling to find as much like visual examples of this as possible. And so I found myself like especially drawn to traditional Jewish paper cuts. And I found that I was like, while I was like cutting and gluing and constructing these collages, I felt like I was acting on a Jewish tradition through that. And so that was like really fulfilling to me. And then one day I was doing just a job for Randy for work study, actually, in the library. And it's funny, I was just there. I wasn't even thinking about my research project. And then this book was glaring at me on the shelf and it said Jewish Fate. And I was like, well, I guess this is where I begin. Like, this just I have to check this book out. And so I found that after checking out that book, that books were going to be my resource here. Like, because I wasn't finding much else in the terms of like academic articles, stuff like that. So I was like, it needs to be books. So I went back to the library after checking out this book by Jim Dine. And I found this book, Jewish Art, which is just a gigantic book of Jewish art history. And then I bought a few books too, including this traditional Jewish paper cut book. So then I was like, I feel like I need more verification that this is important, like that it's not just important to me, that it's important to other people too. So I'm just going to share with you one of these interview highlights, but my dear friend M is going to plug in a nice little folder in the chat that has like my presentation, everything, so you can come back to this stuff and watch everything. So yeah, here.
Growing up, did you ever experience Jewish art?
Fuck no. I am still unclear about what that is now. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think you're like the closest proxy for that for me.
Excellent. So, I mean, that kind of answers the next question. Like, what Jewish artists are you aware of? Or are you aware of any?
Man, I know this one bitch, Rachael Gran. She's cool. Makes good jewelry.
Yeah,
that's pretty much. I mean, like, like Natalie, like, you know, but like I don't know anyone who puts their Jewish identity into their art
Yeah.
like you do, like...
Yeah. Okay. Okay. How do you feel Jewish art is viewed in art education?
I mean, of course it's like completely undervalued or not valued at all as something that's needed in art education, which is kind of ironic considering how important Jewish culture and Jewish art is to, folk art and art in America in general. So, yeah, I feel like it's completely undervalued and underutilized in terms of art education.
Cool. So that was my friend Bless, by the way. He's a really cool dude. So I just wanted to share that with you all because I found that these were the three questions, because I asked more questions than this, but these were the three questions that I found had very similar answers across the board, which was that, like, we don't know any Jewish artists, we don't know any Jewish art, and we feel like Jewish art is not viewed in art education. So yeah. So now I'll just move on to like some findings, basically from my research, and how we can apply this to the art classroom. So traditional Jewish paper cuts, like I said, this really excited me. So they're one of the most important and influential forms of folk art that come from the Jewish culture. So traditionally they were made in Ashkenazi and Sephardic cultures, which are just two different diasporas of the Jewish life. And so I've actually written a lesson plan on paper cuts for 8th grade that could be adapted to other grades as well. And I just think it's a really creative and exciting way for students to engage with a new culture and this idea of symbolism and intricacy and folk art in general. And then we have stained glass. So I think that stained glass is something that is like very often covered in art history and in art classrooms as a project. Like, sometimes we'll have like those, what is that? The paper, the colored paper and stuff. And like students will make like stained glass. But it's usually only perceived to be like a decorative element in Christian churches. But like, here's the thing is that like there's Jewish stained glass and there's also secular stained glass. And you can incorporate both of those things into any lesson on stained glass. These two, I'll actually point out, are in a Reform synagogue that is slightly north of Philadelphia. It was actually my father's synagogue growing up. And they're amazing. And they offer these tours for like $50 for a group of 25. So that can happen, just saying, a field trip maybe, I don't know. And so then we have Judaica. So this idea of like an art piece is like a symbol and something that's beautiful, but also functional. And that's something that we try and push to our students a lot, I think. And this is just such a very clear and concise way of getting that point across that I think should be included in like, especially craft lessons, ceramics classes, stuff like that. Because that's literally all, like Judaica technically is just like Jewish art, but it's used most often to refer to these types of objects. And so I think it's really important to include stuff like this as well. And then I'll just talk briefly about this photography project I did. So this is Roman Vishniak. So he's a Jewish photographer. So basically he, not knowing what was about to strike these communities, took photos of Jews in their communities in Eastern Europe before he fled to the United States from the Holocaust. And so these images were published after the Holocaust, with this book in particular, The Vanished World, not being published until 1983. Almost everyone in the photographs were killed in the Holocaust. And so I found this book was just like this extremely powerful piece that was highlighting this tragedy and plight. But it's not all that we're about. You know what I mean? And that's where my photos came in. So I've never done photography before, by the way, I just want to say that. So this was really like exciting and liberating for me. So these are some images from this project, and it was like kind of just this exploration of my Jewish identity through these photographs. So I found myself including a lot of Judaica, a lot of these art objects. And here I'm wearing my father's Magen David, actually, that he made in his Jewish summer camp when he was little, along with a family chai, all that stuff is included. And so I coincidentally also shot this during Pesach. So I found myself like drawn to the food my father was cooking and the things that we were doing for the holiday. And so that brings me to our Haggadah, which is like, it's super old, it's tattered, the pages are out of order, it's falling to pieces, it's right here. But it's our Haggadah, and it's so beautiful. It has these amazing illustrations inside. It's my favorite thing to get out of the drawer every year. And this to me was like the #1 proof that like Jewish art exists, because I've been seeing this every year my whole life. And so all of these things are kind of like these heirlooms that have been given to me that I've experienced. And so I found myself also particularly looking at the light interacting with these pieces of art. You know, we're now shedding light on this Jewish art, which has always been in the shadows. And so I made this discovery of like, this is Jewish art, these pieces, these objects, the heirlooms, the history, and the photos. These photos are Jewish art. I was actively making Jewish art, and I'm part of Jewish art history. And so with that, I'll just leave you with this final quote by Marc Chagall, which is just that, were I not a Jew, with the content that I put in the word, I would not be an artist at all, or I would be someone else altogether. And so that's my Jewish art presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. Like this, I'm just, again, blown away, and so many thoughts going through my head, but I'm also just going to put you on the spot for just a hot second. And I'm going to ask that, maybe you put a link to any of your jewelry. Do you have your jewelry store online? Because y'all need to see Rachel's jewelry.
Oh yes, I can link.
I'm just saying, you know, and y'all, that goes for everybody else too. If y'all have your arts or your wares that you sell, please go ahead. Feel free to drop your links in the chat. But thank you, Rachel. All right, we will move right along.